Welcome everyone. What I will do first is maybe have a conversation with Donal about the latest novel published in French, All We Shall Know, Tout, nous allons, savoir. And it will be possible, if you want, to have a conversation also with him, if you have some questions to ask. How many people in this room have read All We Shall Know? Okay, so a few will be able to ask specific questions, and those who have not read it yet will be willing to do so afterwards, I am sure. And because this is a very peculiar novel, I was talking to you just a few seconds away. I was talking to you about a study that was made by some readers who are part of a website called Babelio, a literary website, and it was very interesting to get some comments from these readers. And one of these comments was how a 40-year-old man can possibly be in the skin of a young woman. So maybe my first question will be, how did you get the idea for a novel which is based purely on female character?
Well, I'm very in touch with my feminine side. I really am. And I do know loads of women, and I've known loads of women in my life who I loved deeply. And a few of them were very like Melody, I have to say. And it's always kind of amazing when people don't see themselves in your books. It's more unbelievable than when they do. People are usually wrong when they see themselves in my books, but when they actually really are, they rarely see it. But Melody had a very loud, clear voice in my head, and I really love the character of Melody. She's deeply flawed, of course, like we all are. And in the time in the book, in that part of her life, she's extremely free. She's unshackled herself from any kind of emotional or psychological restraint. And so, in a way, that's a very healthy thing. But of course, it seems, her attitude seems corrosive. She's had a kind of corrosive relationship with her husband, Pat. They've come to the point of almost a terminal point in their relationship. They can't be in the same place. But I've seen that acted out in my life. I've seen people spend these terrible lives together in these terrible, constricted, intense relationships where they're literally killing each other, but still can't be apart. It's a really strange thing. It's a horrible dichotomy, this conflict people get caught in, how love can sour so much. But I think, the book really is about Melody and her sense of her own chance at redemption. So it wasn't, funnily enough, she wasn't hard to write at all. I have found other characters very hard to write. Melody really flowed onto the page. It kind of reminded me of, I wrote a book called The Spinning Heart, and there was a character in that book called Lily. And Lily was, she was advanced in age, and she was a former prostitute, and she wasn't somebody I knew personally at all, but Lily's voice was just so clear in my head. It was like a whisper I heard on a Saturday morning, and I wrote that chapter of the book in one morning, and it was published unchanged. Not even a comma was changed. It wasn't edited. It was just, I remember my first publisher going, God, you must have worked really, really hard on that chapter, because it's just so clean. It's just perfect. We're not going to change a thing about it. Not even a comma is out of place. And I wrote that in, I'd say, 2 hours at the most, because I heard this very clear. Now, I know it sounds wishy-washy. It's not this kind of supernatural, ghostly thing. There was no ghost of Lily whispering in my ear going, I want to be in your book. But it felt that way. It comes from within, of course.
It was as if you were channeling the voices of women you have met or heard, or... Because we should say something about Melody. She's a young woman, but even if she's in her early 30s, life did not turn out very well for her. She had big dreams, and they failed. Could you say a few things about her bringing, and how she met Pat when they were late teenagers?
I don't think life ever actually works out the way anyone plans. I think we all end up surprised in our middle age at the way things have gone and the way things might go, But Pat and Melody got together at a very young age. And again, these are relationships I've seen played out in real life. They got together at a hurling match. Melody developed this really intense crush on Pat. And so as teenagers, they became this really cool young couple in the town. And so they have this immediate celebrity. They're kind of a nascent power couple. It's a kind of a horrible cliche, but they really are. And so for a while, Pat has this swagger about him. He's the best hurler in the village, and Melody is his good-looking girlfriend. And they've got this whole kind of, this minor local celebrity about them. And life is easy, because life, when you're at that age, in that position, can be so easy, or seem so easy from the outside. Of course, it's not really. And so they get married and, drift into kind of lower middle class ennui, or NUI as you used to call it before I ever heard the word pronounced properly. And that's what happens in the book. Their marriage goes terribly wrong, but still they stay together, and they start to inflict injuries on each other, and they start to aggregate these injuries over time, and they start to commit more and more monstrous acts against each other. At one stage, Melody says something like, "A Holocaust we had, a wiping out of love." They seem determined to make one another hate the other, but still can't separate. And so Pat commits a terrible sin, and then Melody commits a terrible sin in retaliation. And that's kind of the opening point of the novel, where Melody announces to Pat that she's pregnant with the child of a young traveller she'd be teaching to read and write.
Yeah, this is what I was about to ask you. When we meet her, she has a new turn in her life, and at the very beginning of the book, when she realizes she's carrying another human being in her body, this is a time for her to make a pause and to set everything straight in it, all the records. What are these records? What exactly is haunting her? Of course, a failed love with her husband, but there are quite a few things as well, without telling too much about them.
I was we all leave school, I think, no matter how much you enjoy school. Everybody leaves their school career with some kind of damage. Like everything that happens in life affects you and leaves its mark on you. But bullying in school is, it's universal. It happens everywhere. And Melody is involved in that in school. I won't say too much about it because it'd be kind of a spoiler. I think it's kind of axiomatic in the text, what happens in school between Melody and her best friend. But again, these are all things I've witnessed. I remember when my dad read this book, actually, he said, "You know what, though, people will say this is far-fetched, but it's not at all, because people are fit for anything." And he also said, actually, just fair play to you, though, he took off his glasses and he looked for relief on his face. He said, "You managed to write a book about a woman having an affair with a young fella and getting pregnant, and there's no sex in it." and he was just so relieved, because he had kind of a vague idea of what the book was about before he read the manuscript, and God, he was just so happy. Sorry, my original point anyway. Yeah, so Melody, I mean, like for me, the book is Melody's search for redemption. And I was amazed when the book came out. It got pretty good reviews, but one review kind of savaged it. Well, the review savaged me more than the book, but they said that they were very upset because Melody isn't punished in the book. Now, I think she is. I mean, Melody's, on almost every page of the book, Melody is punishing herself. Absolutely. And there's a huge ultimate punishment that I won't say too much about. And that's, it seemed as though people were saying to me, well, you have to have her being arrested and being taken to court and imprisoned, because she's committed this terrible evil. I mean, she hasn't really. She hasn't broken any law. Now, I've got a legal background, so I'm pretty sure she's broken no law, but obviously she's behaved terribly. Mm-hmm. But, I think there's kind of a trend lately towards people making themselves arbiters of shame. People saying, "Okay, I'm going to actually be in possession of this store of shame, and I'm going to dole it out to people as I see fit. You should be ashamed for what you did. You should be ashamed for what you did. And of course, social media is making it very easy for this to happen."
Yeah. Because the book, we could say, is kind of a confession, and there is also within this confession a tension, because there is a time frame. She knows that time is ticking. She has a baby growing inside herself, and of course the novel structure is has a specific pattern, which is the length of pregnancy. She carries this child, and for 28 weeks. How did you come with such an interesting structure for the novel? Was it immediate? Did you instantly think, okay, I am going to create a novel based upon this set of weeks in which a woman gives life?
Yeah, I wanted to start on week 12 because week 12 is the week when traditionally a couple will announce a pregnancy. It's kind of, it feels like you've got past the first hurdle. You've passed the first area of danger. You know, there's a little bit of safety in it. The child feels secure in the womb. And so it's traditional, I think. I'm sure it's the same here, but in Ireland, isn't it, week 12, nearly always people will announce pregnancy. And of course, in
Same
my book,
here.
yeah. So it's done in kind of a grisly way in the book, where Melody stands it's the very first scene. There's no spoiler here, but she stands at a TV room door, and she looks at her husband, who's, you know, reclining on the couch, and, you know, he's slobbing out watching a match, and she just says, "I'm pregnant." And he looks at her, and then he realizes it can't be his, and then she tells him who the father is. And it's kind of horrible, to be honest. It's a horrible inversion of the joy that moment normally is. But I started there originally, and I framed the book as a pregnancy diary, which is, I don't know what I was doing with that, to be honest. So I was just thinking of the diary of Adrian Mole. You know, I read those diaries, those books, and I was really young. I loved them, and I thought I'd love to write a book like that, you know, with a little story for every day, you know, and one day it could just be a word, another day it could be a big, long diatribe, like Adrian Mole, you know, it's going on and on. It just seemed lovely. It's very hard, though. The epistolary form is kind of, it's wearing. I did it that way anyway, and my editor said, no, this just doesn't work at all. And so I literally deleted all the dates from the various days, and I just made the days into weeks, and all of a sudden, it looked as though I'd done loads of work. You know, I'd spent 5 minutes going delete, sent it back, and went, yeah, it's way better now, flows much better, the weeks are way better, God, fair play to you. I said, yeah, it's very hard. It just made sense, and I do tend to need a kind of firm, concrete structure as a crutch, you know, because I always found it very hard to pace stories and to pace novels. And so I tend to let the pace of a novel be dictated by the structure. And so in a way, it's kind of a crutch. It just seems to work out. I'm kind of getting away with it so far. And also, the confessional nature of it, I can't seem to get away from that idea of characters confessing in my stories. You know, everything I write seems to be in some way confessional. I'm not sure exactly why. I think it's because Joseph Heller's book, Something Happened, influenced me so much. I found it very hard to read because it was just so searing. You know, there's this character who's speaking in the first person, and he's revealing absolutely everything about himself. There's nothing held back in that. It's almost terrifying, that book, because he holds nothing back, you know. It's incredible. And I remember I heard a story at one point, the main character says, "I hate my daughter. I can't stand her." And his daughter, apparently Joseph Heller's daughter, said to him, "Dad, is that me?" And he said, "Well, what do you think?" You know, and they never spoke again, apparently. I mean, imagine how destructive that is. But Joseph Heller was willing for that book to give up his relationship with his daughter, whom he must have loved, of course. And so I kind of just wanted the element of absolute, you know, freedom that's in that book is what I wanted to emulate somehow. You know, the idea of a character who's just going to let it all hang out there. Because, you know, as we were saying earlier, like, I mean, we are all in a way. Actually, it was John McGahern said it. We're all, in a way, hypocrites. You know, we're all liars on a daily basis. You know, to get through our quotidian transactions, to get through the everyday things we have to do, we kind of have to lie. You know, we all go into work, into the office and lie. Yeah, I'm fine, no problem. I'll do that for you, no problem, you know. And we'll all put on a kind of brave face when you're seething inside, you know, you don't want to do it. You know, we all have to do it. But I kind of wanted to get away from that completely and to close the gap between the truth of the character and the reader, you know, to as small a point as possible.
And at the same time, this is a very realistic book about what pregnancy means for a woman. Did you do some research? Did you talk to pregnant women around you? How did you work this specific? Because, you know, I mean, you are a father, of course,
yeah.
And but this is a specific and dangerous field for a male writer.
Dangerous. It is. Really is. You see, I have pregnancy to thank for my career as a writer, to be honest, because when Anne-Marie was pregnant with her first child, she developed an addiction to... Is it okay to tell the story? TV. I'm going anyway, I'm sorry. A TV program called America's Next Top Model. And it was like some women develop, you know, addiction to ice cream and ginger or whatever, you know. And Marie could not stop watching America's Next Top Model. All day, every day, she watched. And it was on all the time for some reason. There was a channel called Living, wasn't it? And they just showed this program all day long. And so I kept talking and upsetting Anne-Marie because she couldn't hear what was going on the TV. And so she said, "Please, look, Donny, you claim to be a writer, don't you? Why don't you just go away and write a novel?" And so I did. So I wrote Think About December, my first novel, because of Anne-Marie's pregnancy addiction to America's Next Top Model. And so that's kind of, it was the genesis of my career as a writer, because that's the book that got me published originally. And but I did pay attention, didn't I, to what was going on during pregnancy. But I still had to consult a book called What to Expect When You're Expecting, actually, which I neglected to acknowledge. I think the next edition that comes out, I'll have to acknowledge that book, because I had to consult it, because I kind of couldn't remember exactly, what went on. I didn't want to make, to put too much pressure on Marie, because she has to read everything I write as it is anyway, And so for the verisimilitude, I turned to that text and not to my own experience, to my shame.
Okay. But I think it's very, very realistic, and every female journalist who has reviewed the book mentioned it, said, this is quite astonishing.
Yeah. Well, I do listen, I'm empathetic. I absorb the pain and experiences of other people. So it was all inside. It all came from within. Absolutely, yeah. And I've had dreams where I actually am a pregnant woman in my dreams. That doesn't count. I know I can't claim to have suffered as a woman suffers in the carrying of children, but they've been very vivid dreams.
Mm-hmm. And would you agree to say that this pregnancy for Melody is also, in some ways, a journey of self-discovery?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's one scene in the book. There's one scene in the book I really like, and I won't say that I don't like my own books, because I remember John Benville said recently, I read back and sometimes I feel shame, I feel embarrassed, because go away, what's that, John? It couldn't be true. But I don't think that fondly of some of my work. But there's a scene in All We Shall Know where Melody is sitting in her father's house, and her father has been feeding her, and she's been eating and eating and eating. And she's gotten, as well as being pregnant, she's gotten really fat. And she feels really good, because it's a beautiful physical state. And she feels really replete and satisfied and safe in her father's house. And she's watching her new friend, Mary Crottery, at the bottom of the garden, talking to her dad. And Mary seems really happy. And it's the only moment where there's a real perfect equilibrium for Melody. She seems really happy and protected and safe in that moment. It's a nice moment. What was my point? Actually, I can't remember, except the fact that Melody was happy in that moment. Oh yeah, so the pregnancy actually suits Melody. Yeah, she does. She seems to get joy from being pregnant. Absolutely, and that's why I won't say what happens at the end of the book. But the end of the book was, and it's not. I think it's a happy ending, to be honest. And before the book was published, actually, about a year before it was published, I was speaking to a journalist in England, and he said, "So Donal, your books have terrible, tragic endings, don't they?" I said, "No, don't think so. I think The Spinning Heart is a happy ending." And he went, "Really, do you?" Yeah. And then I said, "Oh, my new book, All We Shall Know, has a very happy ending." And then I said to him, "Oh, but I shouldn't say too much about it." Now, I meant I shouldn't reveal too much about what happens in the book, because it hasn't been published yet. But the next week, there was a story in The Guardian about how literary writers like Donal Ryan were afraid of happy endings. That in order to be literary, you couldn't be happy. Everyone had to die at the end. You had to have tragedy and darkness, which I don't agree with at all. I think it's a really happy, joyful ending, but I've been told otherwise, to be honest. But you can't tell people how to read a book.
And carrying a child seems to remind her of her own childhood, and she's going to be a mother soon. And it puts her in the perspective of reevaluating her relationship to her own parents. What kind of parents did she have?
She had a very warm, loving father and a very cold, detached mother. And they weren't that much of a stretch, because again, I think we kind of aggregate these experiences, and we witness things in life, and you can kind of draw on these things for fiction. You can never be sure you have it right, but I think Melody's mother saw in Melody's father a kind of an easy match, somebody who wouldn't challenge her. Because she's not that dynamic, and she's not, she knows she won't achieve the things in life she thinks that she was kind of born to achieve, and so now she's this person who is just easy to be in company with. Probably easy to love, because he's a very lovable man and a very loving man. But she does see him always as being beneath her. She knows she has by design married below her, so as not to be challenged in some way. And so, I think she kind of sees Melody as a bit of a challenge, because Melody ends up being like her in a lot of ways. And so I think Melody is kind of railing against that, and she feels terribly sorry, because she found herself in her childhood agreeing with her mum about her dad, you know, and kind of almost joining forces with her against him. And now she feels this awful guilt, but of course, because he's got this almost unsullied soul, he's got this perfect love for her. He doesn't need to forgive her. For him, there is nothing to forgive. You know, his love for her, as all parents' love is, of course, it's unconditional. And just, you know, there are a few points in the story where he's waiting for Melody to come to him, and he's standing by the window, and it seems to her as though all he does in his whole life is stand by the window and wait for her, which is probably true, because he's retired, you know, and his house is trim, and, you know, the garden's beautiful, and so everything in his life is in its place except her. She's removed from him, and he waits constantly for her to come back, and so she feels this terrible burden of guilt, like kids often do towards their parents. But for Melody, it seems to be kind of amplified because of her, you know, her perceived treatment of him in her childhood, the way she thinks she treated him.
And it sounds like her father is not going to let her down, because being pregnant, she's going to face some bad reactions. You know, she comes from a small town where everybody knows everything. This is something you always deal with in your work? Could you say a few things about the landscape, which is the landscape of all of your novels so far?
Well, the landscape and the language and lexicon of all my novels is the kind of borderland between North Tipperary and East Limerick. So I just built this imaginary village or small town in that area. So it's somewhere between Newtown and Neenah and Newport and Castleconnell. And that was just an expedience, because for years and years I lived in a haunted apartment, just me and a ghost, and a boring clerical job, and I was a totally cliched, frustrated artist, and I couldn't write, because whenever I tried to write, I, for some bizarre reason, wrote in a kind of elevated English middle-class accent. I don't know why, you know. I did this for years and years, and I couldn't understand why every single thing I wrote felt wrong, you know, and just felt forced and contrived, and made me feel a little bit sick in my stomach, and I ended up burning it into the sink. Until it struck me that the language and the lexicon I should use is my own, because it was right there for me, it was accessible, and it was musical, and there was a lilt to it. And then, of course, I met Anne-Marie, and she had this beautiful West Limerick accent, which was slightly new to me, because West Limerick was a long way away from East Limerick, you know. But there's a real palpable overlaying of English onto the Irish syntax and structure and grammar in West Limerick. Like, there's a poet, Michael Hartnett, and Michael Hartnett went to live with his maternal grandmother at the age of about 7, I think. Where was it again, Anne-Marie? Temple Glanton in West Limerick. And he started to speak Irish because his grandparents did. And so, and after a while, he switched completely. He started to write all of his poetry in Irish, and he said, English is just a language to sell pigs in. He became very uncharitable about English. But I think what he meant was, you know, we have our own English anyway. You know, we contorted English. And I got an awful slagging for saying this before, actually, in an American magazine. But we did do this in Ireland, you know, we did it. Like, Gaelic is imprinted in our DNA. It's at a cellular level, you know, we're Celtic people, and we spoke Irish for countless years. And all of a sudden, English was imposed upon us. So obviously, as colonized people, we contorted it and changed the shape of it and the meaning of it, and we turned it into a language of obfuscation and exaggeration and lies, because we had to. You know, so I mean, just for example, like you wouldn't say I'm very hungry in Irish. In Irish, you say "Ta ocras an donarm," the hunger of the world is on me. You know, isn't that beautiful? But even the way we say things, I mean, like, just if you consider the verb to bring, like, Irish is the only language in the world where the verb to bring is used in both directions. You can bring that away with you, or you can bring that over here to me, you know. And so if you speak so-called Hiberno English, you will use the verb to bring in both directions. But they're small little, and those kind of examples take the beauty out of the fact that we did that thing. You know, we took the inverted syntax and we overlaid English on top of it to beautiful effect. And that's you know, so it's my native way of speaking. You know, all of the kind of elisions and contractions and kind of, you know, obfuscatory language of North Tip and East Limerick and West Limerick, of course, was just right there waiting for me to use it. Because I know whenever I speak in public, I mentioned this review I got one time. It wasn't actually even in the Huffington Post. It was by a journalist who worked for the Huffington Post on her blog, and she reviewed The Spinning Heart, and her summation was, Spinning Heart is the worst book ever written. This is my first novel, Spinning Heart. Yeah. And weirdly, I didn't mind because she said something lovely after that. She said, and also, I'm sick of hearing people praise, because The Spinning Heart did fairly well in America. She said, I'm sick of hearing people praise this guy for using the demotic voice, because all he's doing is using the slang and grit of his own language. And she was totally right. She was totally right. And I love that phrase, the slang and grit of his own language. But I mean, I don't agree with that's all he's doing. I think it takes some level of skill to do it properly, to do it well and sympathetically, and to use it for fiction, and to use it to tell a story well. But still, I think it was a nice way of putting it. The rest of the review, I disagree with fundamentally, but because she couldn't have read every book.
And could we say something about the social landscape? Because we see in the novel how much Melody becomes an outcast in her own place. Just because she is pregnant with a child her husband did not fathered. She's unwed.
See, I don't think actually. I think I can't. Of course, you can't say to somebody, "This is how you must take this text. This is how you have to perceive this story." But in my writing of the book, I didn't intend it to look as though Melody was being cast out from anywhere. Melody has kind of cast herself out. Melody has made herself lonely. Melody has divested herself of friends and of relationships. And she has made herself into this kind of this proud, alone figure. And she falls almost romantically for Mary Crottery, this young traveller girl she befriends, because she feels such a love for her, because she's not alone now. And it seems as though Mary Crottery was put in her place, put in her path.
I was coming to this point afterwards, because she's going to, get through the other outcasts, and we will talk about the travelers, of course.
Exactly, but Melody has made herself, into this lonely figure. She has told people in the village what's been going on with Pat and his friends inside in Limerick, and she's revealed all these things, and so people are very wary of her and what she might say, what she might do. There's a feeling of danger about Melody, and I don't think necessarily because she's pregnant. I mean, because it's set in contemporary times, so being pregnant, not being married, is nothing. It's not a sin anymore. It's not wrong. It's not frowned upon. I suppose people still do, but to what effect? And nobody has said you can't be among us because you've had an affair with a traveller or a young boy, or because you've done this thing. She's kind of made herself isolated because it's gone largely. I mean, there's still a stigma, of course. I mean, almost everything is in some way stigmatized by some group, but there's no question of her being carted off to a convent or confined or detained by anybody because of her actions. It does, but it does seem to be of that tradition. I can see that, and I can see why maybe people could say, it's still like the old days in rural Ireland. If you read Donal Ryan's book there, like that girl Melody, sure, she couldn't even go down the street because she was pregnant with wedlock. But that's not really the case. Or it wasn't in my head, but maybe I didn't make it clear enough in the book, to be honest.
But it's a supplementary proof for people that she's awkward.
Oh yeah.
And it is not usual to see travelers being part of contemporary Irish fiction. What kind of relationship do you have with this world? Gypsies and gitans, as we call them in French.
Yeah. It's very pat and glib to say I love travelers, but to be honest, I've known a lot of travelers and never really known any that well, to be honest, because you can't really be of that community if you're not a traveller. But travellers I've known in my life, I have really, really loved, and there was one girl in particular who I barely knew, to be honest. She lived in a campsite near a house that friends of mine rented, and so we were all in our early 20s, and we all hung out at this house, and we all worked locally, and we all wore shirts and ties for work. We all had kind of IT jobs or clerical jobs, and she seemed fascinated by us. She'd always walk over to us, and it was very unusual actually to see a girl. She was about 19, 20, and it was very unusual to see a girl from a traveller family walking around alone like that, without her sisters or her friends or her cousins or her brothers. She was always unchaperoned, and this is unusual. And she was always coming over to the house. If she saw it at the door, she'd go, I can't get over you lads. You're all, what age are you all? And we all say like, what, 22, 23. She'd go, none of you married. And you're all living there together in one house. Are you related or anything? No, we're all friends. She couldn't get over the situation. And she'd laugh and joke and mess away, and she'd always end up kind of getting a bit cross with us for no reason that we could perceive. And she'd go, fecky, and she'd walk off, And I really got the feeling of her that she really wanted friendship. She really wanted to talk to us. She really wanted company. And she let a few things slip now and again about an engagement that had gone wrong, or a marriage. It wasn't quite clear which, and how she said something like, none of them will talk to me. My sisters won't talk to me at all. And you could see her eyes filling up with tears. And I got the sense that she was completely excluded because of some bargain that had gone wrong, some arranged marriage or something like that. I didn't know the full story. But she really, she just had this indelible mark on my consciousness. And she was just so lovely, And she seemed so tough on one level and so fragile and vulnerable on another. So I kind of used her as a seed for Mary Crottery. Because I felt bad about it too, I felt bad for never actually declaring her as a friend and saying to her, well, what happened, Tell us what happened. Now, there's no way she'd ever come inside the house. Not I hope that had never happened. But we should have made more of her, really. We should have been more serious about her as a human. We kind of, here she's over again. We just can wait and have a laugh, But that's the way. I mean, it's just a fascinating thing, that travellers are Irish people, of course, and loads of people say there's research shows that travellers actually, and it sounds crazy to say, but are actually more Irish than anybody else. That they have this pure Irish lineage. That the travellers always intermarried and always did, and are traced right back to the chieftains and the kings of Ireland, of the provinces. But are always other, But I remember my grandmother saying, God, when the tinker used to come to our farm, we'd be preparing for weeks in advance for the tinker to come, because he was so revered, Because first of all, there was kind of an implicit idea that the tinker's wife had some kind of magic power because she was a soothsayer, she was a fortune teller, and it was taken a bit seriously. And also because he was such a talented man, because he could mend anything. And so my grandfather would have all the, because they had a big farm, and he'd have all the machinery and anything metal that needed to be repaired, ready for the tinker to come. And it was a big day that he came, and the table was set specially for him and his family. And it was a big thing. But still, they were always other. They'd camp down the Boreen in a certain field, in a certain spot, at the same time every year, and they were always kept apart. No, not by choice. I mean, it was, they were welcome in the farm, of course, but there was just always division. It just seemed to be a natural thing.
Still going on today? Is it still going on
absolutely,
today?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure how much it helps the fact that the travelling community now have a separate ethnic, status. I'm not sure how much it helps now, but I hate this narrative where there's this hectoring voice saying they have to just assimilate. Like, why should they? They're a separate people.
This is about the same.
Tribe.
It is about the same in France.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I totally disagree. It'd be a tragedy if actual traveller culture was lost. I mean, if you hear Cant or Shelta spoken properly by a person who speaks, it's just so beautiful. And there is a music there. I mean, it's dying, of course. But there are people, there's a PhD student in UL, I can't think of her name now, but she's done great work on traveller folklore and Cant and Shelta and all those kind of inflected languages. And, there's an actor called John Connors who has travelled around Ireland, and he's collected stories everywhere in Ireland, stories that could die out. These things are really badly needed. But you can see the passion and the anger in John Connors' face when he speaks about how travellers are treated. Because it's horrendous, really. But, I mean, everything is nuanced. It's just nothing is black and white, of course.
And what did you want to emphasize on this relationship between melody and these people, the travelers? Because this is no other that they are in part of this novel and not of one of your other books.
Yeah, well, I've a couple of stories with main characters who were travelers, all right, because I really wanted to. I wanted to write about people because I know these people. I grew up in a place where travelers lived in the same place as me and went to the same school, and we were all in the same boat basically, and all going in the same direction in life. But with Mary and Melody, it doesn't matter that Mary's a traveller or that Melody is, a school teacher, or it doesn't matter who they are. And the whole point is, and it's the same with Farouk and John and Lempi in my last novel, like the differences between us are just so minute when you boil things down. You know, when you boil anything down to the core, I mean, what makes us all the same is our humanity, and the way we feel things and perceive things. You know, the variations between people are so slight; it's just unbelievable. You know, and because we're all part of the same huge network in the universe, we're all part of the same existence. You know, and we're all so interrelated. It's just like it's for some reason that fact can be occluded so easily by the things, by the noise in the world. You know, by our political systems, by our stratified societies. Every society is stratified, and nearly always rigidly. It's so hard to break out of who you are. You know, you could become a billionaire, but still, sure, you're man. He came from nothing. You know, you'll hear it said all the time. It's horrendous, and still, and even things that aren't articulated, we'll think about people. You know, and it goes back to this kind of this necessary hypocrisy that we all carry around. We all do it. You know, we'll all think things that we won't articulate. You know, and then we might even chastise ourselves for thinking these things, but it's hard not to. But anyway, the point is that Mary and Melody are so alike and need each other so much. You know, and Mary sees in Melody just somebody to love her, you know, to be loved by, and the same for Melody and Mary. So I think their relationship is kind of beautiful, and you can see how it would happen as well, because they're both in this position where they're so isolated, and then there's this beautiful fulcrum of Melody's father between them, you know, and he's just this kind of almost in a way the character of Melody's dad is kind of anodyne, you know, and unnuanced because he's so pure, because he just kind of is this unremitting light of love in their lives.
And we should say that Melody is going to meet Mary through Martin, and you mentioned his name, but we don't know really who is Martin. Martin Topi.
Yeah, you know, Martin actually kind of walks into the novel and he's present all through it, but still almost entirely absent. Because I kind of started off a book about Martin and his brothers, and it wasn't going that well. I was kind of grinding it out, and Martin's voice was very clear. And then there was kind of a situation between Martin and this very attractive woman who'd been teaching him to read and write. You know, that was kind of developing and was heading that way, and I kind of left it there. You know, and I had started All We Shall Know before I wrote that story, but I didn't. I thought all through All We Shall Know, Martin has another job to do. You know, in this book, he's just this. Oh, he's almost a cipher. You know,
but he's a medium.
Yeah, but in a way, I think. But I did develop him a bit. You know, Martin is kind of just as Melody's dad is this kind of symbolizes this kind of light and this unremitting love. Martin is this unremitting male strength. You know, this figure of absolute faithfulness. You know, there's no way he'll back down. You know, he goes into a bare knuckle fight because he knows he has to, because it's the only way to stop this feud between his family and another family escalating. And you know, and that's a thing that people don't realize, because I remember a critic, a so-called critic, reviewed that book for The Observer, and he said that I had used a very cliched, unnuanced approach to travelers, because I included all these cliches like bare knuckle boxing. But I'm not going to try to pretend to anyone that doesn't exist that traveller men don't get involved in bare knuckle boxing, because they absolutely do. You know, I've seen it with my own two eyes. It's everybody knows that. You know, it's a thing. And in a way, like, of course, it's terrible, it's violent, and you know, it's bloodletting, but it's for a reason. It's a way of resolving things sometimes, and sometimes maybe it's necessary within that society. I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm not saying I know all about it, but I think I know enough to know that it's done well in the book, done properly. And that's what Martin is. He's just this really faithful, strong, true human being, you know, who knows what's happened, and he has this kind of innate perspicacity. I never said the word properly. You know, he kind of sees without being told what stories. He knows what he has to do. And actually, I kind of make Martin do an awful lot towards the end of the novel. You know, unasked. He just kind of knows. It's kind of like I programmed him just to turn up and do what he has to do and get the hell out. Which is kind of Martin all out, really. It sums him up, really.
But Martin is not only a traveler. He is 17, twice younger than Melody. So this is one more obstacle to, you know, not only is he different from her, but he's twice younger than she is. Why did you decide to get such a young man for her? What was the idea behind that?
I'm not really sure, actually, to be honest. I can't remember exactly what I was thinking when I wrote that.
She has to be his teacher.
I'm so sorry now to make him 19 at least, because, it's cutting it a bit close, all right. It's still
No,
a bit
but it
close to the
shows
edge.
how desperate she is in her life,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
because he is somebody who is showing her tenderness and interest. She is almost bringing her back to life.
Yeah. I mean, Melody's attraction to Martin is very real. I mean, there's no artifice there, and she doesn't set out to create a situation. But now that she has it, now that she's pregnant and the child exists, she kind of thinks, well, I might as well just use this now as this weapon, this terminal weapon against Pat and my marriage. But, I didn't want it to look as though she had, from the very first day, set out to seduce this boy to this end, to have this thing to use against Pat. But yeah, I do in a way kind of regret making him 17, to be honest. Yeah, if I had my time again, he'd be at least 18, if not 19, 20. But of course, by then, chances are he'd be engaged.
But if Martin do step out, he has a very important role in the novel. He is the one who's going to lead Melody in a way to Mary, and Mary is going to be a close friend, become a close friend, something she has not had since a while, for good reasons.
Yeah, there's a kind of I'm not sure if you'd call it a subplot, but there's a kind of a tragedy in Melody's past when it comes to friendship and friends. And again, a friendship can be as toxic as any other relationship, or even more so, because there's the kind of double hurt of the fact that you choose your friends, and so it's almost a double betrayal if somebody that you silently enter a relationship with turns on you like that. Because friendship should only ever be positive. A friend should only ever make you feel good about yourself. That's the essence of friendship for me. I've only got a handful of really true friends in my life because they're the people who I know will never deliberately hurt me. And that's the way it should be. And Melody, of course, has this, but it goes horribly and spectacularly wrong. And I think she kind of almost retrieves it with Mary. But then it's so hard to say that. I mean, I don't want to be like the people talk about being arbiter of shame and say, well, you did this wrong now, because we'll all behave badly. No one is going to be a perfect friend, just as no one's going to be a perfect parent or a perfect child or a perfect spouse.
And they have a very unusual friendship, a friendship which is liberating to them both. But how does a man write about female friendship? Because it's not the same that male friendship. Not the same expressions. How did you do that?
I guess I suppose there's kind of a requirement before you set yourself the task of writing fiction to learn, I guess, and to be very open to things. And I always say that writing fiction is an act of extending empathy beyond its natural limits. It's not the kind of ordinary empathy you use every day, and it's not this kind of noble act either. There's nothing transcendent about it, but it's just a matter of sitting down, literally, and almost entering this state where you forget yourself and who you are, and you allow the things that you've learned in your life and the things you've experienced or the things you've kind of intuited about people, wash over you and become you for that moment. And when it came to writing Melody, and especially scenes where Melody and Mary's friendship is developing, I just really tried to forget who I was and tried to really, as much as I could, feel what it might be like to be Melody in that moment or to be Mary in that moment. And that's all you can do, really, and you can never be sure you have it right. And it might chime with some people as being true. Others might see falseness in it. But it's a risk you have to take, and it's a risk. I'm not saying that it's a dangerous game or anything, writing fiction. It's fairly easy most of the time, and you're locked into a room and no one can annoy you, usually. And you're not at the mercy of the moment like actors are, You're not standing in front of a painting or anything, and with all its flaws apparent to everybody, the book is hidden away behind covers, which is great, But you do take risks on a constant basis as a writer. Mm-hmm. You have to, and you open up your soul sometimes to people, and you expose to people how you feel the world works, how you feel the world is, and sometimes you look a little bit innocent or foolish or feel foolish, or you look wrong, basically. But sure, you have to do it, we've no choice. Because we need stories, because narrative and stories predate language. They're just the essence of us. They're what makes us human. Because the world is so senseless and inchoate and chaotic, and we need to put direction and shape on it. And those, I'm not sure exactly where in France they are, but those ancient cave paintings, they predate language, and they are literally a perfect arc. They actually are in the shape of an arc from the morning of the day of the hunt all through it to the very end, and all the things in between that happen are there in a perfect narrative arc mapped out in beautiful style on the walls of caves, because that seemed to be necessary for us. We had to make it make sense, and it's beautiful, and also it's artifice, and it's fake, because nature in its very essence, the very smallest particles are completely random. They don't make sense. The smallest parts of us make no sense. So that's what narrative is. I think it's our reaction against that senselessness that seems to pervade the universe. Of course, the universe itself in some ways seems completely ordered. That's a bit wishy-washy, in fairness. But sure.
Can we say that there is a female solidarity in front of men in the novel? Because I was surprised to see that in Melody's life, there is a father who is an old man. There is Martin with a young man. There is no one in the middle, in between. And so there is something of a statement somewhere about the situation of the patriarchy of Irish society and the nocivity of that society regarding women. Is this something that you had in mind?
Yeah, for sure. I can't stand this kind of casual sexism. This kind of throwaway ideas about what men are and what women are, what people should do. And I'm also very wary of this new didactic, prescriptive form of feminism, where you have young men telling middle-aged women how to be a feminist. That's dangerous, and it's a bit horrible, to be honest. But as my friend Joseph O'Connor says, being a feminist is just common sense. And my father was a real feminist. My parents were really socialists without even trying. They never considered the concepts of socialism or feminism. It's just one thing. People had this there was an egalitarian feel to everything they did. There was a traveller lady who came on Saturdays to the house, and she was my mum's friend, and she sat at the table. And it never seemed to me to be unusual. And in my life as a child, women seemed to have the exact same roles as men. One of the most powerful women in the village where I was from was a woman who, was a widow who controlled a huge farm. And she was always driving a tractor or, forking hay and foddering cattle. And this didn't strike me. And my dad laboured on her farm on Saturdays, and they were good friends. And it didn't seem to me as at all unusual. And so, because I was saying earlier, like, I went around the world like a fucking idiot for years, and I was in my 20s and 30s even before I started to cop on and really see the world, not as it is, but in a kind of truer way. And to see these real and perceived divisions that exist between people, and it started to hit me that some beliefs about what people should be or should do or should conform to were just encoded in people, were just, immovable. It was so hard to change the way people thought about certain things. And you can't blame people, Again, you have to go back to the person with their little store of shame, tweeting all their little tweets about how people should be ashamed all the time. In a way, we should all be ashamed. And in a way, we should all just forgive ourselves and just try to be kind. Because that's all it takes to have a perfect world. And not that religious. I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian, but I just love the message in the New Testament. The only message it seems Jesus was trying to get through to people was if everybody just cops on and is kind, the world will be perfect. We have the capacity to have a perfect world, but it doesn't seem for the most part to be possible. But that's the essence of it. Of course, it's a truism, and it's obvious like that. We should all just try to be kinder. That's all it takes.
So when we say pregnancy, we think child. We are not going to say anything about that baby, but what you were saying earlier about the happy ending. This is a surprising ending, I should say, and very beautiful, very unusual, unconventional.
Yeah.
Was it obvious from the very beginning? Did you already have the end in mind when you started working on the novel?
I think it was I was about 1/3 of the way through the first draft, and I started to discuss possible endings with Anne-Marie, and I remember there being a few different endings, wasn't there? And it just seemed the most natural ending. and it just seemed obvious. It seemed as though it's where the book had been heading from the very start. And I thought to myself, and when I said it to the Guardian journalist, I was so honest about it. I really thought, oh, my next book, you won't believe it. It's so happy. It's actually nearly too happy an ending. You know, it's brilliant. Everyone's happy ever after. But then again, having said that, I remember writing it actually and getting a bit upset as I wrote it. So maybe I wasn't that happy. I thought at the time maybe I'm really happy because it's been a bit of a slog, this novel, and it's nearly finished, and I'm just so happy. That's why I'm crying. Because sometimes I'm not that in touch with my own emotions when I'm writing, because you're kind of so removed from yourself. But yeah, I guess I was. I mean, I heard Mike McCormack, who I adore as a writer and as a human, say once, I have no memory of writing Solar Bones. And I thought, that couldn't be true, Mike. Why? Way out of that. But thinking back, actually, it's kind of hard to remember even one day of writing any book, one specific day. You know, they are kind of all a blur. And you do kind of get removed from yourself in a way when you write, because that struggle to try to inhabit other beings and other existences and other worlds while you write, it can kind of make you slightly disconnected. You know, so you have to really try, you know, do your best to keep your grip on things. That's why all writers are half mad, I suppose, or all mad, I suppose. Because, I mean, art is madness, really. The whole idea of it, to try to create something that in some way informs or describes existence, I mean, it's a fool's errand, really. But it's also the propulsion. It's what fuels it, because the attempts will always fail. You know, all art is failure. There's no perfect piece of art. So that's why we try again and again and again to get it right, and always fail, of course. I'm not saying that we set out to fail, but I mean, you know, there is no piece of art that perfectly explains existence to people who exist.
Writing this novel, what did you learn from it that you did not learn from your other books? Why was it different? You know, was it? What did you discover about yourself, about life, about the world?
I was actually proud of myself when I finished, and I discovered that we all set out on our writing journeys with a list in our hands, real or imagined, of things we think we can't write about. And that's a list that you have to burn. You have to burn it. That list has to go. Because you can write about anything you want, you know, and because of that, you will suffer the oppression of infinity, because the fact that you can write about anything will leave you sitting there chewing your pencil going, well, what the hell am I going to write about? I can write about anything, and any story I write can go any way, you know. And so what do you do? But there are so many people now who say, no, you can't write about that, you know. You can't write an Afro-Caribbean immigrant to London in the 70s because you're not that person. If I just wrote myself, it may be a really boring book over and over again, you know, because I love my life, but
I don't think so.
I know, Francis, it would, in fairness, no, come on, like, I'm not that exciting a guy, you know. It'd be very boring, really, to be honest. So, I mean, and you have to go outside yourself, and you have to get it right, of course. You have to do your best to get it right. You have to be sympathetic and empathetic, and you have to be kind, and you have to make sure you're not just taking somebody's experience and using it in a horrible, mean-spirited, you know, constricted, you know, way for mercantile ends. But you have to be sympathetic. But there's nothing you can't write about as a writer. There's nothing you can't draw if you're an artist, you know. There's nothing you can't sculpt if you're a sculptor. So why should we limit our art in any way? But like, you will have people who will tell you in a really strident, trenchant, hectoring voice that yes, that's what you should do, you know. And otherwise, you can take some of this blame here, this shame, and you can take it and hold it, and we can all point at you and say you should be ashamed.
What kind of reaction did you get from readers, both male and female? Were they different? What did they share with you?
I always filter out the weird stuff, actually, and try to just retain the very bad stuff and very good stuff. I don't know why I do that, but it seemed to strike a chord with lots of people. It seemed to feel real and right for a lot of people, and an awful lot of people absolutely detested Melody, and I felt really upset on her behalf because I loved her. I thought she was great, you know. Of course, she's done terrible things, but sure, we all have done that. Not as terrible as Melody, maybe, but you know, she's very self-aware and she's very strong, and she knows kind of what she has to do, and she knows what she's done, and she's very free. She feels guilt on every page, and she inflicts punishments on herself all through the book, but she's kind of unshackled from the shame of it. at this stage, you know, and I just think it's liberating, you know, as a book, and as a book to write, it was liberating. But people, yeah, I guess it has the most mixed reactions of all of my books, really, yeah, because of this kind of, because people either say, God, I thought Melody was great, I thought she was fantastic, or else they absolutely think she's beyond redemption, you know, that she has no redeeming characteristics at all. But that always happens to me, to be honest. You know, I tend to kind of fall for characters a little bit, and they develop this energy that seems to be an energy from outside of myself, even though I know it's not, because it's ridiculous. It has to come from within myself. But they feel very real very often. And Melody felt as real as any character I've ever written. She really seemed to live and breathe. And so it's hard not to feel upset on your character's behalf when they're not liked. Even if somebody might say, oh God, I love the book, but God, Melody was an awful bitch. Oh jeez, I hated her, you know. I always feel a little bit of myself inside, kind of going, really, Melody? Because they, you know, she feels very like a family member, you know. Poor Melody. She's okay now anyway. Oh no, you don't know, I don't know. That's not a spoiler.
Alors Marie-Hermé, votre traductrice française est là. Marie-Hermé, your French translator is here. Maybe if you agree, we could ask you how it was for you to translate this particular book with this very interesting character. And what did you think yourself of Melody?
I should have prepared for this. It was a labor of love. I fell in love with Melody. I fell in love with all of Donal Ryan's books, from the first one, which I read in I think 2012. And I was very happy and also very frightened of getting it wrong, because you used the word chime, and that's a very important word. The text does chime, and it's very difficult in French to give back something like that kind of very special Irish English that you described, which is the lilt and the chime in it, and the music and the melody. So I really was focused on that, trying to get it right, keeping in mind the translation that I admire, for example, Singh, who was also accused of fabricating some kind of language spoken by peasants, but not the real one, of course, and being in between all those worlds, literary and rural. And there are beautiful translations in French. So I read a lot, and I went on Google Maps to see where exactly they were, which was nowhere since it's an imaginary village. And I liked Melody very much. I loved her. She's wild. She has some kind of anger which is completely justified. For example, at one point, two guys ring at her door, and they have a petition that they want her to sign. It's about a neighbor who has been allowed to he's been given a house, is not given, but he's been allowed to move into that neighborhood. And the guy, apparently, there is a rumor saying that the guy was a sex offender. And she says to those two guys, very righteous men, I've never met a man who is not a sex offender. And she's a very contemporary, very true character. She also had that scene when she also, all those old ladies who love telling tales and who are very righteous and go to church every day, probably. And she's not, they are not her style. So it was very interesting also to get the voices right, because she's a teacher. She has a good education. She can write, and Mary is illiterate. So that was a very interesting thing to have Mary speak, not in a broken kind of language, which would be ridiculous, with grammatical mistakes and things that are sometimes that you see and they're not right. Her real language really needed to sing and to feel right, without being grammatically entirely correct. But it had to be done very cautiously. no obvious mistakes, just some elisions. Do you say elisions? I'm not sure. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marina. I must say it's a real pleasure to have a book in the hands of an artist like Marina, because she just seemed to read it so deeply and to feel it so deeply. And I know I said that you can't say to somebody, this is how you have to see a character, but Marina just seemed to see the characters exactly as I saw them, and it was just such a lovely thing. And thank you so much for just the artistry and the skill that you used on that book. I don't know how you do it, to be honest, because translation is just, to me, it's a dark art. It's just something like, I don't know how you do it, especially for my books. And I mean, and I have to say thanks to Albin Michel for publishing my book so beautifully. I mean, it's just such a gorgeous object. You know, I just love it so much. All of my French books have pride of place in my mum's house in Nina. Literally, you know, when you walk in, they're literally right in front of you. You know, you can't avoid them for the neighbours to see.
This novel is all about voice. Would you agree to read the first 2 pages?
First 2 pages? Ooh, okay.
Goodbye, Pat.
Yes.
And I will read afterwards the translation.
Okay.
So.
Martin Toppy is the son of a famous traveller and the father of my unborn child. He's 17, I'm 33. I was his teacher. I'd have killed myself by now if I was brave enough. I don't think it would hurt the baby. His little heart would stop with mine. He wouldn't feel himself leaving one world of darkness for another, his spirit untangling itself from me. At 7 weeks or so, a fetus starts to move. Imperceptibly, they say, but I swear I felt a stirring yesterday, a tiny shifting, a shadow weight. I've been still and silent all these weeks, listening for him. I sit here with the curtains drawn and the TV muted, waiting for a hint of something in the soft glow of things detonating, people bleeding, corpses being carried, swathed in flags by dark-eyed men, people arguing and kissing and driving in cars, people opening and closing their mouths. I've measured his time from the actual minute, not from the first day of my last period like a doctor would, where a woman would be having normal sex and normal life and wouldn't know one moment from another. But all my moments now are marked and measured, standing out in unforgiving light to be examined. Pat came back yesterday from weeks of work around the country, installing water meters. They had to stay in digs, he said. The work was round the clock. The day he left, he bent and kissed me on the cheek. His lips were cold. He paused before he straightened. I can't remember if I looked at him. That was on the 2nd day of the 7th week. I stood at the TV room door last night and looked at him, stretched along the couch in his tracksuit bottoms and Liverpool jersey, barefoot, unshaven, soft-bellied, defenceless. I'm pregnant, I said. He swung his head towards me, and there was a sharp light in his eyes. Was it maybe joy? That extinguished itself after a moment, as he remembered. I told him the father was a man I'd met online, in the voice I always use to make him know I'm serious, low and even. He sat up, then stood before me and shouted, Jesus, just once. Then he raised his fists as though to punch me, but he pulled back and punched the air before my face instead, and he said, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. And he put his fists to his eyes and cried very hard, teeth bared, eyes closed, like a little boy who's just felt shocking pain. There wasn't much more to be said or done then, so he left. He was white as he walked with his gear bag towards the front door, 2 small discs of livid red in the centres of his cheeks. He looked back at me from the open doorway. He was ghostly, washed in pale orange light. Are we even now? His voice was low, almost a whisper. I didn't reply. I always loved you, Melody Shee, he said. All I said back was, goodbye, Pat.
Martin Toppy est le fils d'un homme célèbre chez les gens du voyage et le père de mon enfant à naître. Il a 17 ans, j'en ai 33. J'étais son professeur particulier. Je me serais tué depuis longtemps si j'en avais eu le courage. Je ne crois pas que le bébé souffrirait, son petit cœur arrêterait de battre avec le mien, il ne se sentirait pas quitter un monde de ténèbres pour un autre lorsque son esprit se désenlacerait de moi. Vers la 7e semaine, un fœtus commence à bouger. C'est imperceptible, paraît-il, mais je jurerais que j'ai senti un mouvement, un léger déplacement, le poids du nombre. Pendant toutes ces semaines, je suis restée immobile à l'écouter, sans faire de bruit. Je suis assise là, avec les rideaux tirés et la télé allumée sans le son, à attendre un signe dans le faible reflet d'explosions, de corps en sang, de cadavres enroulés dans des drapeaux par des hommes aux yeux sombres. Des gens qui se disputent et s'embrassent et conduisent des voitures, des gens qui ouvrent et referment la bouche. J'ai calculé son âge à la minute près, pas depuis le premier jour de mes dernières règles, comme le ferait un médecin pour une femme qui mène une vie normale, avec des relations sexuelles normales et ne fait pas de distinction entre un moment précis et le suivant. Mais pour moi, chaque moment désormais est marqué et mesuré, soumis à examen sous une lumière impitoyable. Pat est rentré hier soir, après des semaines passées à sillonner le pays pour installer des compteurs d'eau. Ils dormaient dans des trous perdus, m'a-t-il dit, et ils ont travaillé comme des fous. Le jour de son départ, il s'était penché pour m'embrasser sur la joue. Ses lèvres étaient froides. Il avait marqué un temps d'arrêt avant de se redresser. Je ne me souviens plus si j'avais levé les yeux vers lui. C'était le 2e jour de la 7e semaine. Hier soir, je suis resté un moment à la porte du salon et je l'ai regardé, allongé sur le canapé devant la télévision, dans son pantalon de survêtement et son maillot aux couleurs de l'équipe de Liverpool, pieds nus, parasés, le ventre rond, sans défense. « Je suis enceinte », j'ai dit. Il a relevé brusquement la tête et s'est tourné vers moi avec dans les yeux un éclat vif. Cela pouvait-il être de la joie, qui s'est éteint très vite lorsqu'il s'est souvenu. Je lui ai dit que le père était un homme que j'avais rencontré sur Internet, avec la voix que je prends toujours pour lui faire comprendre que je suis sérieuse, basse et posée. Il s'est assis, et puis il se mit debout devant moi et il a crié « Merde !» une seule fois. Il a levé les poings comme pour me frapper avant de reculer et de se mettre à boxer dans le vide en disant « Je vais te tuer, je vais te tuer !» Puis il a posé les poings sur ses yeux et il a pleuré, très fort, en découvrant ses dents, les paupières plissées, comme un petit garçon qui vient de se faire mal. Il n'y avait pas grand-chose de plus à faire ou à dire. Alors, il est parti. Il était tout blanc, à part 2 petits ronds rouges au milieu des joues, quand il s'est dirigé vers la porte d'entrée avec son sac. Sur le seuil, il s'est retourné pour me regarder. Il avait l'air d'un fantôme, baigné d'une pâle lueur orangée. « On est quitte maintenant ?» Sa voix était basse, à peine plus qu'un murmure. Je n'ai pas répondu. « Je t'ai toujours aimé, Mélodie Shee. » Et moi, tout ce que j'ai dit, ça a été « Au revoir, Pat. » A very striking opening scene.